You're listening to Puma Podcast.
You're about to hear an excerpt of an upcoming episode of A Better Normal, another Puma Podcast production hosted by our editor in chief, Carl Javier. He talks to Diego Adame of the Lego Foundation about a recently released study about children and video games. The findings may surprise you.
My name is Diego. I am originally from Mexico, but have been living in Denmark for some years because I work for Lego Foundation.
And what does Lego Foundation do?
Yeah, I think that most people would know what Lego is, and I have to
Yeah.
say, we know it's a very popular brand, and it's great to be part of this group because whenever you introduce yourself, very often people will have a smile in their face because they think of the toys. And what people usually don't know is that Lego is still a privately owned company from Denmark, and that 25% of the company is owned by the foundation. So that's where I work. And this means that the foundation, being an owner of the company, we get dividends from the company. And what we get to do is to use those funds to support projects all around the world, especially in low and middle income countries, to make sure that kids have access to play experiences. In the Lego universe, we believe that play is one of the best ways for children to learn and to develop. And in the foundation, we have the privilege to do that for kids that otherwise would not have those opportunities.
That's such an interesting structure where the foundation owns part of the main company. And the reason why I reached out was I found this report on digital play so interesting, especially because it's coming from Lego. But can you tell us a little bit about the context of this report, why you guys are studying, and how you're working with UNICEF on this?
Yes, and can I ask you a question first? If you think
Sure.
of a child in your life, any child that you care about, and then think of that child engaged in digital experience, that it's in a video game,
Yeah.
what comes to your mind when you see that child playing?
I always worry. I always worry that they're getting too used to devices. And that I don't have kids, but that's the number one concern. I go out to a restaurant and it's just children swiping and parents aren't paying attention. And I'm sort of in that space. As a person who loves video games, I'm also concerned about the amount of time that kids spend with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the answer I was expecting, and the answer I would give normally. And we know for many years, and right now, spend more time than ever in digital experiences, being that gaming, social
Mhm.
media, or any other thing happens in the screen. And as adults, we also worry that they're spending too much time and that how bad that is. And there's lots of studies that have shown the negative effects of screens. But what we try to do in partnership between the Lego Foundation and the Lego Group, which is the commercial side of Lego, was to turn around the question and say, okay, we have heard too much that digital is bad, but we have not heard enough of how digital can be good. Is there a way that
Right.
actually digital experiences could be good for children? And that was the inception of this all this work that we started 3 4 years ago in partnership with UNICEF to say, is there a way in which digital experiences can actually promote children's well-being? And that was our starting point, and that's what led to a framework that was created, and then to more research, and it's all evidence-based. And spoiler alert, the great news is that yes, digital experiences can actually be really positive for children's well-being when they are designed in the right way. And so we're trying to change the narrative from digital is always bad, because we know that digital will not go anywhere and kids will continue to engage in
Right.
that. So let's move on and say, how can you do it in a positive way?
Yeah, so I was gonna make it about myself as like a 6-year-old first grader, and my parents were concerned that I was going to destroy my eyesight and be awful because I was playing Nintendo when I was a kid. And it seems like the answer I gave you earlier is the same concern that my parents had, that these things are bad for kids. So when you say that it's digital play and it's designed, what does that mean? And how does that design make it better for children?
What the report has come up with is a framework that has 8 different elements or categories, and and the way also we look at it, there are different moments in the design process. There are what we call the more strategic choices that are before even the game is designed or developed, is when you think of the concept of the game, or of like how are the characters going to be put together, what are the levels, what is the progression, what are the different avenues that the players will have. So having those conceptual decisions, that's one very important area when you can decide how you're going to design your game so that it will be positive for children. And then there is the more we call the tactical, when there's that more the developers that are actually making the choices of exactly how is it going to look and feel like, and that's also important to look at that. And a very simple example is one of the areas of the framework is competence, and we have seen that video games or digital play can help children get a sense of competence. And one way to do that is sometimes in gaming, players have the opportunity to skip one level. And if they skip one level, then they get rid of that frustration that they could not do one level, and they can move, and then maybe afterwards the next level they will be able to do it. And that has a huge effect in some kids that probably in their life they're struggling, not feeling competent or not feeling like they can make decisions. And when they have the decision to say, I am going to skip this level and that's okay, and now I'm going to succeed in the next one, that the research shows that that increases their well-being. But also to say that it's different for each child. Some children might see skipping a level as a failure, like, oh, I failed in the other one. So that's when designers have to think of, okay, how do you give the options to children? That for some children it will be very important to skip a level, and for some kids will not want to skip a level, and that's also okay. But as long as you are building the experience so that they can have these different opportunities, or there are games that kids don't get to create anything, that is just like a monotonous thing, well, it's less likely that you will promote well-being than when also we have seen when the kids are able to create their avatar, that allows them to express themselves, to think about their identities and how do they want to express themselves and their uniqueness. And it's a simple thing. I mean, I said that because I don't design or develop games. I'm sure that developers will say like, well, that's very complicated. But it's just those kind of choices that can be done, and that's what this report is saying. That there are all these 8 components that you can think about when you are designing a game that will help children to improve their well-being.
Whatever form the play takes, one of the things that's valuable that I see is people facing adversity. And that's why, like, when you're faced with a level and maybe you're going to overcome it now or something. And so I'm wondering about the other aspects that you might want to talk about. If I'm recalling correctly, some of that there was like empowerment, inclusivity. So there were a number of other values that were there. And if you wanted to speak more about, say, things that you connected with, or things that you found really interesting about this report, maybe.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because there are 2 aspects that also the report is saying. There are 8 components, and we cannot expect that each game is going to deliver on everything, because that's even with physical play is the same. You cannot expect that one play experience will give all the benefits that play can have. So, but it's being intentional. But one clear takeaway from this report, there are 2 aspects that are in some ways non-negotiable. One is the safety and security, to make sure that it is a safe and secure space for kids to engage. That's a baseline for children, and that's true also in physical play. You need to make sure that kids are safe, and so that they can make the most out of the play. And the second one is around what you were mentioning: diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is about making sure that there's representation and that kids feel like they relate to the character. So those were the 2 aspects that the report is clearly saying. Those are non-negotiables. We have to do. And then there are the other ones that are in some ways. Sometimes you will dial up in one. Maybe you dial up in what we were talking before on the autonomy, but maybe you in this one is more like a solo player. In others, it could be more social, more about the relationship. One of the things that the study also found, there were like 3 different research projects going in parallel, and always came back that game digital play is really good for developing relationships and creating those connections, and also for kids feeling that sense of belonging. And to your point about going back also to your question about children facing adversity, when I think of physical play, children, for example, in a refugee setting or in an emergency or in a conflict setting, we have seen, and there is evidence that play has a strong role for children in those situations, because when children are playing, often they're imagining different scenarios, they're imagining different possibilities. And that is so important because in real life, when we're facing adversity, we have to be able to imagine that, okay, right now this is difficult, but there are 10 other possible or a million possible other outcomes. And that allows us as humans to be able to cope with that. And digital play is incredible for that because you are really thinking of other scenarios. You sometimes are creating those scenarios and those universes. And maybe a child that is facing adversity in whatever dimension that is in their personal life, going into the digital world can help them to create those different scenarios and to realize that it's not only one right answer or one avenue or one way forward for life. There are a million different scenarios, and that always gives you peace of mind when you know that there are a lot more options out there than just the one that you're seeing that doesn't look so good at the moment.
I love that. And I hadn't imagined that use case of children being able to escape their immediate difficult surroundings through this. Um, why should people care about the results of this? Why should they be interested in these findings? I'm excited because I love video games and I love to say, look, they're great. But the normal person, they come across this. What should their takeaway be?
I think their takeaway should be that digital play is not bad for children, and that it could actually it's not only that it's not harmful for children, but that it can actually have a positive impact on children's lives. But it's also for adults in the life of children to be aware that there are all sorts of different games. Some of them are definitely not positive for children's well-being, but there are many that are. And the next stage for us is to start bringing all this research into more practical. What does that mean, and how does it represent, and how does a game show characteristics that are good for children's well-being? I'm hoping that to the start of this conversation, that also as adults, we can feel less stressed about whenever we see a child that is playing, also to think, are they learning and they're improving their well-being? And that hopefully will also give us as adults an opportunity to explore more what the game is about and to start reflecting ourselves. Do we think that's helping the child or not in their particular circumstance? So I think it's a more positive lens to digital play that we have heard for the last, I don't know how many years, since you and I were playing with Nintendo many years ago, that was always the concern. But also we knew that we were developing skills, right? We were being strategic and we were playing with others and we were doing so many things that today in our life probably are super useful. But at that time, our parents were only thinking of the negative effects of that because it was something new.
Yeah, so they can step away from the paranoia and know that it's not digital play itself, but it is the quality and the aspects of the game and what good games, good by measure of this study can offer.
That was today's episode of Teka. I'm Bella Perez Rubio. If you found this story useful, why not share it with a friend who might be interested? And keep an eye out for the full cut of this conversation on A Better Normal, our show featuring innovators working to build a future worth looking forward to. Pidoy Blanco edited this episode. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our editor-in-chief is Carl Javier. Thanks for listening.